One thing that unites pretty much all guitarists is that we all love gear. And I'm certainly no outlier when it comes to loving gear. But in today's video, I'm going to be discussing what gear a beginner guitarist will need. Because let's face it, it takes years to build up a large collection full of gear, so you have to start somewhere. But I think especially as a beginner, starting off small with just a few basic necessities is definitely the way to go because you don't want to get option paralysis as a beginner. That's something you don't want to do because you should really just be focusing on getting better at guitar. And what you need to start with that is a guitar. I have a list down at my feet, and there are 1, 2, 3, basically 4 things that a beginner would need, and that is it. And of course, if you look around me, there's much more than 4 pieces of gear around me, but that's just because, like I said before, it takes a lot of time. You build up things, you realize what you like, and you want more of it. But as a beginner, you should really only have a couple things, that way you're really able to focus on getting better at the instrument itself, rather than just becoming a collector right off the bat. But the first thing you need is obviously a guitar. Hey, Cole from the future. I just want to take this time to mention that today marks my 10-year anniversary with making YouTube videos. Now, of course, not every single one of those days was spent making YouTube videos, of course, but the last 2-ish years I've been really dedicated to making these guitar YouTube videos. But it's really interesting to see, for over half of my life, I've been making YouTube videos, whether that be about Nerf guns or reptiles or whatever it may be. Lacrosse I did a little bit of. It's just really cool to see how, I found the niche that I think I really want to take this channel in, and I'm really excited to see what this channel has for me in the future. So here's to 10 more years. So leave a like for that, and let's get back to the video. But the decision on buying your first guitar is definitely one of the harder things to do as a guitarist. I think the simpler the instrument, the better. I often wouldn't recommend something with the Floyd Rose to a beginner because they're a lot harder to maintain. If you break a string on one of these things and you've never restrung any guitar before, it's going to be very difficult to learn how. And even now, I've restrung guitars hundreds of times, but even still, the Floyd Rose gives me a bit of trouble. So I'd recommend staying away from a Floyd Rose style guitar. But I think the best way to decide what kind of guitar you should get all boils down to what kind of music you listen to and what kind of music you would like to play. If you want to play metal or rock or something like that, don't get an acoustic guitar right off the bat. You can get one later and experiment with it later, but right off the bat you should probably get something that has humbuckers and is able to take on a lot of gain, while an acoustic guitar can't do that. If you want to play some country, maybe a Stratocaster right back there, or a Telecaster is a good option. And if you want to play rock, maybe something like this without a Floyd, or a Les Paul, or an SG, or even a PRS. PRSs are good for anything, so that's always a good model to go down to if you like it. But basically finding the right instrument for your specific genre of music that you want to play, one that you like the look of, one you like the way it feels, and the one that sounds how you want it to sound is definitely what you want to go for, and don't just listen to what other people say. Some people will just say, oh, you should get this guitar because it's a good beginner guitar. Any guitar can pretty much be a beginner guitar as long as it kind of fits the mold of it's easy to learn on and you don't have to do a whole bunch of tricks in order to make it work. The amount of times I've heard that someone has told me that you should learn on an acoustic guitar first because it's harder than electric, it just doesn't make any sense. Yeah, sure, if you want to play an acoustic guitar, buy an acoustic. But if you want to play AC/DC, don't buy an acoustic. Buy an SG. I could talk about that all day. Maybe in the future I can make a video on what guitar is good for what. Another thing I like to keep in mind whenever I give people advice on buying their first guitar is to spend a good amount of money on your first guitar. There's kind of this belief that gets tossed around in just everything, not only just guitar, that you have to spend just a little bit of money on something you're getting into. To me, that doesn't make any sense. Now, yeah, with some things, it's a good idea. Like, if you're buying a motorcycle, you don't want to spend 30 grand on it because you're probably going to crash it pretty soon. But something like a guitar, there is no risk of that, so I think it's perfectly fine to spend a good amount of money on a guitar. My reasoning being is, if you see it on the wall and you spent $700-800, which is a lot of money for something you've never spent money on before, you're going to want to play it because you want to get your money's worth. Now, of course, that number varies from person to person. $200 might be like a huge amount of money for you, and that's completely fine. If that's enough money to make you feel like that you're being held accountable, then of course, that's great. You can find a lot of good guitars for that price. But for me personally, I think spending a little bit more is what makes me want to play it more. It's the same reason why I bought this camera for this YouTube channel. I knew that if I continued using my phone, and if I ever got discouraged, I'd probably end up stopping making these videos. But since I bought this Canon M50, it was about $500, I think. That's enough money to make me want to make sure I get my money's worth out of it. That's something I like to live by in my life, just with pretty much anything, not just YouTube videos or guitars. On to the next thing. Now that you have purchased your guitar, it's time to buy an amp. There's a lot of things to keep in mind when buying your first guitar amp. And in my opinion, I think the best thing to keep in mind is versatility, which is why I would personally recommend the PositiveGrid Spark for any beginner. If you've never heard of this guitar amp before, first of all, where have you been? Second of all, it's one of the most versatile amps out there. The main selling point of the Spark is you're able to connect it to an app, in which there are thousands upon thousands of presets that you can download and play with your own guitar. You're able to play along with drumming machines and even play along with some of your favorite songs. Not only that, but this amp sounds really good, especially for how much it costs. This amp right here is only around $300 on Amazon. Now yes, it may not sound as good as the real tube amp counterparts that you could buy for thousands upon thousands of dollars. It gets you pretty dang close. I do have a link down in the description that's an affiliate link to where if you find yourself being interested in this amp, you can go check it out. And also, it supports the channel, so thank you guys very much. The next thing you're going to have to buy are guitar picks. Now, I'm the type of person where I have to look for the best version of anything I own. And I've been like that my entire life. I had to have the nicest Lego set, I had to have the coolest Nerf gun, just because if I knew there was something just one little bit better, that's the one I have to own. I think that's one of the more annoying things about myself, but that's just who I am. So when I first started getting into guitar, I looked up what are the best guitar picks, and nothing really came up. And that's because I learned that there are no best guitar picks. A guitar pick is a guitar pick. And it all really boils down to what you like the most. I like thicker picks, such as this Dunlop Big Stubby 3mm. In about the half a decade that I've played guitar, I've definitely collected a large amount of guitar picks. This is because, at least in my experience, I've run into a lot of people who don't play guitar, or maybe they just had a guitar, or somehow they just got their hand on some picks, and they no longer play, or, there's a family member passed away or whatnot. And again, so they had no use to those picks, so they just give them to me because they know I'm a guitarist. That's happened to me so many times, so I have quite the collection of guitar picks, which unfortunately I'll probably never use, but they're still very thoughtful gifts. These are also picks that I like to give to other people who are just learning guitar. I give them a nice variety. I let them use some of my picks. I let them use some other thicker picks, some thinner picks, some of the Fender ones, just so they kind of get a good variety, and maybe they can see which ones they like the most. Because again, there is no best guitar pick. It all boils down to which one you like the most and which one kind of fits your hands the best. The next thing that a beginner guitarist may or may not need, depending on their style of music, are any kind of accessories that aid with that style of music. That being capos, that being slides, anything that kind of helps you play what your genre requires. I never use a capo, and that's just because the songs I like to play, the stuff I like to improv on, it just doesn't need a capo. Same thing with slide guitar. It's something I would always like to learn how to do. I've just never had the need to do it, but it does sound really cool. So if the genre of music you like to play the most requires these things, those are also some little accessories that you may need. This is more of a tip as opposed to like actual gear you need, but it's really important to not cheap out on the cheap things. That being things like your guitar strings and your guitar cables to connect to your amp. Those aren't really very expensive to start off with, and the cheap ones, the ones that are meant to be really cheap, will sound terrible, as opposed to just spending $3-4 more to get some actual high-quality guitar strings. And guitar cables. Those are one of those things where you may only have to buy a couple times, especially if you're just a bedroom musician. Now sure, they might get worn down if you're playing around the country, but most people that's not the case. So these guitar cables will last you a lot longer if you just spend a bit more money on just nicer quality cables. The guitar cables I personally recommend are from a company called SpeakFriends. These are really good quality cables and I've never had any issues with them, so if you guys would like, they will be listed in the description below. Thank you guys very much. And if Amazon no longer sells those exact cables, I will leave a set in the description below that are very similar. You may have noticed that I haven't really mentioned many guitar accessories other than just like a capo or a slide. And that's because a beginner guitarist shouldn't really have any need for a pedal. Their main focus should be getting the basics down, and once they have the basics down, that's when they can experiment with manipulating your tone through amps and stuff like that. Now that doesn't mean a beginner guitarist shouldn't get a tuner. Of course they should. It's a good investment. but I didn't list it as a necessity because there are plenty of free tuner apps that you can get on your smartphone. And with that, one more point I would like to make, and I think it's really important not to focus too much on gear, and this is something I could also learn for as a slightly more advanced musician. I think I could be a lot better as a guitarist if I spent more time practicing rather than perusing eBay and Reverb for more guitars. Yes, I love gear, and you probably do too if you're watching this video, but I think it's really important to kind of realize why we play these instruments. We play because we want to feel connected to them. But if you're just searching for another guitar just to add to a collection, again, there's nothing really wrong with that. I collect guitars. But it's important to know that you really want to build a relationship with an instrument through practice and through growing with it and learning. That's why I think your first guitar is so important and you shouldn't really sell it. Because my two main first guitars, that being my Aria Strat and my Epiphone Les Paul Traditional Pro, are both guitars that'll never leave my collection. Not because they're fantastic guitars, because, let's face it, they're not the best. But they're never leaving my collection just because of that bond I've created with them, because I grew up with them. I learned guitar on them. And look where that's led me today. But with that, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you guys liked this video, feel free to click like. And if you loved it and you want to see more content from me, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video.